In 1786, Dublin's Bow Street Distillery got itself a new general manager, a Scotsman by the name of John Jameson. Now, Mr. Jameson had married into the Hague family, who were major Scotch whiskey producers. John Jameson was a general manager until 1805 when he bought the distillery outright, and the whiskey got its name changed to John Jameson and Sons in 1810. Though the family was able to increase annual production 30-fold by 1900, the business was hindered by Irish independence in 1921 when they lost easy access to all the Commonwealth markets. This was followed by the Great Depression several years later, which further crushed their business. In 1966, Jameson and its major rivals merged to form the Irish Distillers Group. In 1976, the Bow Street Distillery was closed and production was moved to the new Middleton Distillery in Cork. So, keep in mind, Jameson is not the company's name. Jameson is not the distillery's name. Jameson is a brand, and a powerful brand at that. In 2019, it sold 8 million cases of whiskey, 90% of which were exported. And in the United States alone, Jameson makes up 80% of the Irish whiskey market. So, let's drink some Jameson. We can use the front label and the tax strip on the older bottle to figure out when it was bottled. The front label shows 750 milliliters. Liquor bottles were required to use milliliters for their volume measurements, starting in 1980. The alcohol is measured in proof. This practice ended in 1989. So far, this was bottled sometime in the 1980s. From 1983 to 1985, tax strips said distilled on one side and spirits on the other. So this was bottled between 1983 and 1985. There's one more thing of note on the front label. It says Bow Street Distillery, Dublin. The distillery was closed in 1976. I'm kind of hoping the whiskey was distilled at that old distillery, but that's not a given. And the newer Jameson's bottle has the bottling code right on the back, most likely saying that this was bottled on the 9th day of 2020. Okay, so here are our 2 bottles of Jameson. First, this one was bottled in the early to mid-80s, possibly distilled in the 1970s. And this one was bottled in 2020. I'm going to follow a couple of procedures here for this tasting. First off, I need to be honest. Jameson was not designed to be sniffed and sipped from fancy whiskey glasses. So I'm going to try it 3 different ways. On the rocks, from a fancy whiskey glass, and as a shot. Now, thing number 2 is I'm going to do small amounts of each so I can be conscious for the rest of this tasting. 1980s Jameson. Measure this out. (2020) Jameson. First, shots. 1980s Jameson. There's a little to no heat in the shot. There's a lot of brown sugar, but even like a little bit of toffee pudding and a hint of smoke, actually. But a very easy shot. I'm sure this is a great idea. 2020 Jameson. I can see why it's so popular. There's very little heat. There's very little fight to it. It does have that simple young grain whiskey note, but it's a little floral. There's a little bit of tart citrus and a little bit of brown sugar, but that's all. Jameson on the rocks. I'm going to do it now before it all floats away. The 1980s version. This is a different whiskey on the rocks. It's quite fruity, very peachy, nectarines, a little bit of vanilla. There are actually some citrus notes, and the vanilla character gets richer with Time for 2020 Jamesons on the rocks. I get very little from this one. It's a little bitter, a little tart. It could really be almost any young spirit. It's not that bad, it's fine. It definitely did not open up, it didn't get any fruit notes like the 80s version did. And now for the wee whiskey glasses, starting with the 1980s Jameson. The beard makes it a little difficult to nose. Oh yeah, all of those palate notes from here, all those fruits are in the nose right now. So you have peach candy, orange pixie sticks, lemon zest. I'm surprised by how well it noses. The 2020 Jameson. It's different. It's flatter. The nose has a little bit of fruit, but it comes across as artificial. A candle with sort of that artificial fruit scent to it. It's got a little bit of a mossy note, a little bit of a Midori liqueur note. 1980s Jameson, Solange. Getting banana pudding with like vanilla ice cream, tart lemons, tart limes. It really does get fruitier with time. It gets a little tangier with time. And what's surprising to me is that its finish is nice and long and mellow. 2020 Jamesons, Solange. It's a little floral, a little tangy. There's a slight gingery note to it. There's a very artificial sweetness about it, but at least it has the same sort of tangy finish. It never takes on any of the really negative aspects of cheap whiskey. There's nothing harsh about it. Again, it's not that offensive. It's pretty approachable. I'll be honest, I liked it better as a shot. Yes. There's at least 35 years separating the distillation of these two whiskeys. The older Jameson really has a nice fruity element coming from the spirit. The newer Jameson is a little flatter, simpler. The 80s Jameson does actually work in a snooty whiskey glass, but they were designed for this, or for this, and in that aspect, they work well. Our pleasure, our experience with the whiskey on a day-to-day basis is the important part. I mean, you buy the bottle, you should drink it the way you like it. And I am going to pour this in here. Pretty good.
Papa, your time is up.
Sounds like my time is up.